Every time we engage with something, does it have to be real? The intersection of possibility and morality. So now things are going to heat up here. And I want to say as we get into this section that here especially, as well as to some extent the videos before this in this short series, I'm really trying to put together things in as condensed a way as possible as I can that will give the whole arc of, I think, a really important line of thinking and feeling that might be somewhat missing, all right? But a lot of the subjects that I get into could be huge discussions in and of themselves. So, if it seems like there's a lot more stuff behind the scenes there, a lot more that can be talked about, well, obviously that is true. All right, so getting into this one now. Possibility, right? Different doors, different options, real choices, and all of that, all of what that entails, what it really feels like. Each time we interact with a series of choices, we experience a gateway to possibility. That's sort of what possibility means. This sense of possibility opens with a spark of wonder because I believe there's joy in it. And that is something that's fundamentally human and something that tends to get forgotten by lots of different kinds of people as we get older. The door that you've chosen being one of many, Do you get to choose another door afterwards? All these kinds of things feeding into the joy of possibility. But we don't need to go straight to big life choices to understand this. So I'm not just talking about big choices in life and life itself as a series of choices. That's a whole other kind of discussion. But I'm talking about something that carries through and has a lot more energetic weight. We most often experience this kind of possibility through games and play that are true excursions into the possible. Games are really interesting on a consciousness level because in games, we get to do and try things that in real life, either we can't do because they are just physically impossible, or things that we won't do. And this won't do piece is where morality comes from. Because if you won't do it in real life, even if you can experience it in a game, that means that we have an issue of morality because you find it immoral. And quite rightly so, maybe, make-believe, family, and board games, these are some of the categories that people are introduced to oftentimes from a young age. So games are a huge part of who we are when we grow up. That's totally a given. And in our time, things have expanded and pushing that frontier later and later because a lot of people enjoy video games as a lifelong pursuit too. So video games have really taken the fore in many ways as far as games and gaming, right? Games give us the ability to experience states that satisfy both of those conditions above, meaning a lot of them would be just impossible in our world, and others, if taken literally, would be immoral. And a huge part of that are, of course, games depicting war and depicting violence. While many games are neither warlike nor violent, it does prompt a larger question here. Where do our loyalties lie? How do we make that choice there? Between possibility, of course, I'm talking about experiencing something versus morality, considering that we're just dealing with a game. Games are not the only place to experience an experiment. And this is where, again, we're going to quickly go into this other area that I think you need to consider because we're really dancing around the question of consciousness and reality. And when you're playing a game, you're experiencing a different version of reality. You're sort of diving into that to some extent, right? And that's huge in dreams, which of course is really ubiquitous and universal. Dreams such as being present in dream catchers, dream catching, the power of dreams. Dreams are common and a huge part of us. In fact, if you're going to call dreams an altered state, is that really adequate to describe them? Because then you have to ask what would be the unaltered state, right? Many world traditions actually hold that our dream states can be as real as our waking states, or even more so, for getting advice, getting perspective, or, and this only compounds in the a lot of the awakened New Age communities with all kinds of notions of dream time and different kinds of travel. All of this is getting into consciousness, the nature of reality, or what's called in philosophy, epistemology, what knowledge is and how we know. We should consider that the concepts of the real oftentimes is actually uncertain or relative altogether. It sometimes goes unnoticed how extensively this topic has been explored, though, and this is sort of a really important side note that I'm making here in a variety of world settings, because in addition to something that's a little bit more known relatively, such as spiritual books, spiritual circles, mystics throughout history, Eastern traditions, you find notions of the importance of kind of dreams and the relative nature of states of consciousness, etc. Actually, mainstream Western philosophy too has covered this. So these topics do exist in the West, but the thing is, in the West, a lot of this stuff, I'm not going to get into it now, of course, but a lot of that has actually been hidden, covered up. Its existence in the education system is much less than what it was a few generations ago, covering topics in how we know what we know, consciousness states, what's called epistemology, this kind of a stuff, which really does connect very neatly to spirituality. So the point I'm making through all that, for those interested, is that all these fragments from our civilization, our culture, our literature, our birthright, really, a lot of them have been scattered. But you can find them and put them back together. Okay, so what are dreams then? And are we talking about stuff that's purely fantastical, diving into your unconscious, and in other words, stuff that doesn't really have moral content because it's just kind of an excursion into something? Or do they actually contain morality? Can you have a dream about something immoral? Is there morality in a dream? And it makes us wonder, what does a dream even look and feel like? How do we know we're dreaming? More questions about dreams and consciousness. If something bad happens in a dream, then do we instantly recoil? And if we find ourselves playing a strange part within that dream, can we still take it to be interesting? Can we still take it to be valuable in some sense? And also then we can make the flip to quote unquote real life and think about acting. And what about in the context of an actor, someone who's acting something out, like a game, almost like a dream, almost, in a play or a movie? How are we going to interpret that from the perspective of right or wrong, from the perspective of morality? Where do we find the moral content in games, in dreams, in acting? All these things, right? Films, theater, what I'm talking about. Video games, make-believe and art, fantasy, novels, and dreams, right? The human experience gives us countless opportunities to see how we're engaging with our consciousness and exploring all reaches of the possible. It seems like we as humans are always looking for more, are always looking for different possibilities, situations to try on for size, like clothes. For example, books take us to all kinds of places, including novels about war that people read all the time. Football, like many sports, American football, of course, takes its roots in simulating combat. There's a war or combat notion underneath a lot of this. And this is an open question. Does this mean that there's something wrong there? It's very interesting. And you can add the qualifier if nobody gets hurt in those activities, or if nobody gets hurt when you read a novel set in wartime. If you're putting your consciousness there and choosing to put your consciousness there, is that something negative? It's really interesting. Okay, so now suppose, taking a step back, suppose we are just talking about energy. Energy pure and simple, just energy in the universe. This energy wants to find a home. It wants to try something purely for the sake of possible experience. Who gets to decide what that energy will do, where it can go? Who gets to decide if it's even going to be aware of what it's doing? Think about that. Can you really say if all of this, any of this, will be wrong? So now to drive this point a little bit, if people simulate war, people simulate inequality or suffering or all these ills that we have, and this can be allowed, how can we say that this world altogether isn't just one big simulation from that moral perspective? Who are we to say that all of this is not okay? The fact is, and this has sometimes been a roadblock or blind spot for the truth or light community, the argument that X, Y, or Z are wrong or immoral and therefore must be stopped has not worked out very well. And this applies pretty much to all types of moral crusades done purely on the basis of principle throughout time, really, just unfortunately judging by history. Certainly, when you add in the concepts of free will and the soul's ability to choose things, things get especially murky. It's almost as if the universe gives preference to expansion and expression of possibility, even when they seem to the detriment of certain natural laws. All this is getting quite cosmic, but what I'm saying here is if there is a conflict between experiencing something as a possibility and the idea that something's going to violate natural laws, that it's going to violate life, that it's going to be immoral, it does seem like the universe, or this one, or however you want to look at that, is giving a preference to the side of possibility. Can a moral argument ever fully carry the day here then? So what about all the people who have heard it and still chosen to continue life as normal? And we're talking about sleepers. And here, an awake person in this kind of caricature is saying, please wake up. No. The other person, shown, illustrated through this idea of the gate or the membrane, their gatekeepers, is saying, no thanks, I'm not going to wake up this time. So we've shown how powerful the collective energy is, and we've said how it fits into multiple worlds here. We've explained how hard people work to keep from knowing certain things, how much information gets trapped in the membrane. I mean, that's hard work. When you think of all the information, all the stuff that's evidence to our human sensitivities, to not know that consciously, that takes a lot of work. That takes a lot of effort, spiritual energy, to not know those things. If it all comes down to possibility, then what are we supposed to conclude? So thinking about people who are asleep, who see all this around them, who can feel it, who can read between the lines on some level, but who are choosing not to know. To some people, most people, do they just want to be oppressed? Is that their path? There are actually real reasons why so many haven't made this switch, though. There is a lot on their minds that they'd have to leave behind. That's because the two sides of this dialectic have not been reconciled. Asleep versus awake. And over on the other side, still, is a whole special kind of light.